Hey, welcome back to my channel. Today I want to talk about highly sensitive people, or HSPs. I want to talk about this topic for two different reasons. One being that the topic of highly sensitive people or highly sensitive person is becoming more known, more talked about, which I think is absolutely great to speak about in regards to mental health. And secondly, because I am an HSP myself, and learning this about myself was very eye-opening for me. When I learned about highly sensitive people and the traits that come with it, I was completely mind blown because it literally feels like me to a T. I only wish I knew I was an HSP much sooner in life, because I think it would have saved me from a lot of stress and worrying and honestly confusion about who I am as a person. And knowing I have this trait really helps me make better decisions for myself and my life. The term highly sensitive person is not a diagnosable mental illness. It's not in the DSM-5. It's not a formal diagnosis recognized by mental health professionals. It is, however, becoming a more commonly accepted and talked about as a cluster of personality traits. I believe being an HSP is more due to genetics. You're born an HSP. However, I believe it can be emphasized when an individual becomes hypervigilant in childhood. Because they have to turn to hypervigilance in order to keep themselves safe in their family dynamic, they learn to really cue into sensory information, whether it's noises, facial expression, to keep themselves safe in an unpredictable home. But what is a highly sensitive person, or HSP? A highly sensitive person is characterized by someone who is very sensitive to sensory stimuli. Even when subtle stimuli they are much more aware of, they tend to think really deeply about themselves and others, and this is related to more sensitivity and sensory processing than the average person. Whether it be physical or emotional, the external or internal stimuli are felt much more intensely, including emotions, whether positive or negative emotions. They are felt really strongly. I definitely relate to this because I felt for a really long time that when I was sad, I'm not just sad, I feel downright depressed. But when I'm happy, I'm very happy. The emotions I experience do feel really extreme and almost like there's no gray area. I am very aware of what I'm feeling at any given moment, but I'm going to talk about that more later. So this isn't to be confused with an empath. I think highly sensitive people tend to be really empathetic because they feel everything so deeply themselves and they're so cued into the environment around them. However, empaths don't have the sensory component to them. Empaths are deeply empathetic, but don't necessarily feel sensitive to other external stimuli around them. Dr. Eileen Aron, who was the original psychologist who coined the term highly sensitive person and conducted research on this group of traits, created an acronym known as DOES. D, depth of emotional processing. O, overstimulated. E stands for emotional responsiveness. S stands for subtleties, sensory, and stimuli. When we consider depth of emotional processing and emotional responsiveness, this really goes back to HSPs really thinking deeply about the world around them. Yes, from a sensory standpoint, but again, very much so with emotions. And speaking for myself, I think a lot of other HSPs tend to really overthink emotions, especially my own. I could do this all the time. I literally can spend hours and hours thinking about why I feel a certain way about a situation or why I feel a certain way about a person. I tend to overanalyze and overanalyze my emotions. And my therapist has told me that I could over-intellectualize my emotions rather than just feeling my feelings. But I feel like that's just how my brain works. Being an HSP, I feel like my overall understanding and emotional depth is truly deeper than the average person. And I'm not saying that to say that I'm better or I'm more special because of it. I actually feel that because HSPs have such deep emotional processing abilities, that's what naturally pushes us into overthinking and overanalyzing, and honestly sometimes being too self-aware. I think this is great in some ways because HSPs do have the ability to have deep self-reflection, but if this gets unbalanced or obsessive, it can lead to mental health issues like anxiety and depression. When it comes to heightened observation with environmental stimuli like music, background noise, lighting, HSPs tend to get very drained easily from socializing, parties, going out to even bars and restaurants can be really emotionally draining. I think it's safe to say most HSPs are definitely introverts where we need alone time to recharge. Overall, social situations really tend to drain us rather than recharge us and give us energy. So why do we need to talk about HSPs more? I think talking about HSP traits needs to be more commonly discussed. Well, because I think it can mimic and look a lot like symptoms of what mainstream psychology would consider a mental health issue or possibly a disorder. When I started researching this topic from both a personal and clinical perspective, it felt like a lot of these traits of being a highly sensitive person overlapped with formal mental disorders, or at least seem very similar to what mainstream psychology might consider a mental health issue. Which got me thinking, how many people are walking around as a highly sensitive person thinking that there's something wrong with them or that they have a mental health issue when they really are just a naturally sensitive person or HSP? When I think about how sensitive HSPs are to sensory stimuli in our environment, it makes me think about being neurodivergent. Being neurodivergent, whether it's ADHD or being on the autism spectrum, are also very sensitive to external stimulus. Someone who has either ADHD or autism, they could have a sensory processing disorder, which is very common, where it is difficult to filter out certain stimuli around you. And as someone who has ADHD, I know the filtering processing system in our prefrontal cortex is underdeveloped. People who are neurotypical can automatically filter out information around them, but people with ADHD, we have to actively do this ourselves, which makes me wonder how closely linked ADHD and being an HSP is. It wouldn't surprise me if many neurodivergent people are also highly sensitive people. But let's also get back into the emotional processing side of things. HSPs tend to have very deep, more extreme emotions. We feel emotions very intensely. All emotions are felt very strongly. And again, I wonder how many mental health professionals are out there uneducated about HSPs and misinterpret HSP traits as symptoms of a significant mental health issue. I could easily see an uneducated therapist mistaking HSP traits for a mental health disorder. That being an HSP can easily mimic being neurodivergent or having issues with emotional dysregulation like mood swings and intensity of emotions. Because HSPs have a tendency to feel really deeply, I could see it potentially being labeled as anxiety, depression, or even bipolar disorder, which actually did happen to me. So if you feel like you may be an HSP, I would really recommend the book The Highly Sensitive Person by Dr. Elaine Aron, where she goes into much further detail of her research on hypersensitivity. So you could inform yourself on HSP tendencies and traits. Knowing I was an HSP has really helped me better understand myself and make better decisions for my personality and my life. I wish I knew much sooner that I was an HSP because it would have helped me significantly when I was growing up in middle school, as a teenager, even in college. Looking back, if I knew early on that I am just ultra sensitive to emotions and environmental stimulus, many things would have been a lot easier for me. If you're an HSP and raised in a family where being sensitive is looked down upon or not easily understood, or you're made to feel weird or that something is wrong with you because of your sensitivity, this can be really damaging to self-esteem and self-worth. Unfortunately, we live in a society where sensitive traits are typically not valued. You could be seen as weak or difficult. I have memories growing up where I was regularly told that I was difficult, overly sensitive, that I needed to grow thicker skin, which was extremely hurtful. And mixed with other mental health issues, it just compounded the feeling that there's something wrong with me. So if you're an HSP child growing up in a home that may be on some level emotionally neglectful or abusive, I believe this can be very detrimental to the child. Growing up in a home where you constantly are told you're too sensitive, too dramatic, is traumatic for anyone, any child, but because HSPs are inherently very sensitive, and this is a trait that one does not simply grow out of. It's a fixed personality trait. It can really have negative lifelong effects. Because HSP individuals are naturally predisposed to be very sensitive, growing up in an environment where emotional neglect and or abuse is present would just be that much more damaging. And I fear that without this being talked about enough with mental health professionals, therapists, psychologists, and not having the proper mainstream acceptance and understanding in society, HSP children are more at risk of developing anxiety and depression. I hope one day society views hypersensitivity more positively. It's actually a good thing to have clear, strong emotions and to be aware of those emotions. Yes, we get overstimulated easily, but we notice and observe things in our environments that other people wouldn't notice. And while this may come with some difficulties, there's also a lot of positive traits that come with being sensitive, like having high emotional intelligence and really strong sense of empathy, making us really good friends and romantic partners. In an upcoming video, I'm going to speak more about highly sensitive people in relation to ayahuasca, so keep an eye out for that video. And if you would like to hear more about holistic mental health and psychedelics, I would love for you to subscribe.